Disney Pixar's Toy Story 5 is set to open this weekend, and some outlets out there are calculating a nearly $300 million global box office debut. But the real issue with this movie is what happens in the weeks following the opening, because there's a lot of competition coming up, and already early reviews are giving it some very positive buzz, but people are also noting that this is a very, very Jessie-heavy movie. In other words, the boys aren't really back in town so much for this one. And I think Disney made a calculated decision on that. And we're going to talk about something that nobody else is mentioning out there. Let's get into it. Ready Online. All right, let's get right down to the nitty-gritty. Hit the like and subscribe and do all that fun stuff. We've got this from Variety magazine, and I picked this article for a very specific reason. Toy Story 5 eyes a record $150 million plus opening weekend. Now, to be clear, they are specifically referencing the domestic North American, U.S., and Canada box office opening, not around the planet of Earth. But in this article, there is a key component here. Of course, we always go through the financial numbers, the math of how the business side of Hollywood works, what this movie needs to do to be successful at the box office, and we get that from Variety. Variety says, overseas, Toy Story 5 is expected to see $135 million in its 5-day, 3 to 5 day, really international opening for a global tally at or above $275 million. Toy Story 5 carries a whopping $250 million production budget, not including global marketing expenses.
Not so fast, Lone Star.
Now, as we've come to learn through education and experience over the years, the most often scenario here is that Variety is quoting the net production costs, meaning, yes, after the film tax credits and everything due back to Disney Pixar for the production of this, depending on where they shot it, where the work was done, so on and so forth. Disney uses a number of different locations, although I suspect the bulk of this was done in the U.S., and specifically California. At a $250 million price tag, which, if we know anything about Disney, is likely a little bit higher than that, you factor in global marketing, which is at the absolute worst case scenario, almost it didn't happen worst case scenario, $100 million in global P&A. Let's be honest, this is probably a lot closer to $150 million than it is $100 million. This is, after all, the quintessential original pinnacle of Pixar animation. This is the film franchise that started the whole thing. So I don't expect Disney to skimp whatsoever on a film like this, especially considering that it's been about 8 years since the last entry to Toy Story. Let's take a stroll down memory lane, as we often do. Let's take a quick look here at the chart. Let's look back at the original Toy Story movie that had a $30 million production budget, had an opening weekend of $29 million back in 1995. Yeah, 31 years ago, if you can believe it. That legged out to almost $200 million. Toy Story 2 apparently had a limited release for its opening weekend and then blew up the following, so it's a little hard to track that one. But Toy Story 3 opened up at $110 million and finished at $415 million at the domestic box office. Toy Story 4 opened up at $121 million and finished at $434. Now, what do you notice about that from the first Toy Story movie to the fourth? Well, if you've been watching me long enough, then you've probably already picked up on the fact that the front-loading for these Toy Story films, as one would expect as the franchise matures over time, has gotten bigger and bigger. When you look back at the first Toy Story movie that opened at $29 million and finished at nearly $200 million, that is one hell of a leg out. That's obviously a very different era in theatrical exhibition. But it was almost a 6, if not almost 7x, between a 6 and 7x leg out. Now we are down to under 4 when it comes to leg out, going from about $120 million to $430 million. That compression has gotten much greater. What is then going to happen with Toy Story 5? Toy Story 5, it would not at all surprise me if it doesn't even make it to a 3X. If it does, maybe to about a 3.5X. That's why we have to look at the blockbuster potency of this as time has gone on and ask a few questions. Let's stay focused on the domestic box office here and take a look at what we're dealing with. 199 million to 245 million, with those movies 4 years apart. Inflation was not terribly potent during that era. Toy Story 3, 11 years after Toy Story 2, jumped up to 415 million. And you can factor in some inflation there, but even still, Toy Story 3 certainly overperformed Toy Story 2, and a lot of people consider Toy Story 3 to be the best that was ever made. Toy Story 4, a full 9 years later, only managed to pull in about $19 million more at the domestic box office than Toy Story 3. That means undoubtedly that Toy Story 4 was not as big of a butts in seats movie as was Toy Story 3. Toy Story 5, that's where the question mark comes in. But of course, let's not forget about Lightyear.
Juicy fingers, that's the best part.
In today's dollars, 2026 dollars, that original Toy Story movie that repped about $375 million around the globe would easily be north of $1 billion today. Probably somewhere close to 1.2 to 1.3 billion. It would not surprise me in the least. Toy Story 2 would probably see a relatively similar number, closer to maybe 1.5 billion. And then Toy Story 3 at 1 billion or 1.06 billion back in 2010 would actually be pushing nearly 1.75 to maybe even 1.8 billion today. Ticket prices have radically inflated since 2010, and a good bit of that inflation has happened post-COVID. That means that Toy Story 4 that repped 1.071 billion, roughly about, 500 to 600 million less than what Toy Story 3 would have done in that year, I'd suspect, just based on ticket prices alone. That means that Toy Story 5, if it just treads water and pulls in what Toy Story 4 did, it's probably lost a good 30% of the audience at least.
Those people die off like dinosaurs.
But as of right now, people are saying that this should be a $1 billion movie, and I absolutely believe it should be. But again, that's taking into account that 2026 ticket prices are absolutely astonishing. A standard ticket price for an evening showing on a regular standard screen is about $15 to $16, and PLFs are running 20 plus. IMAX, you're getting close to 25. And of course, there's a lot more PLFs, including Dolby, 4DX, and IMAX today than there was back in 2019 even, God forbid, 1995. Now, say what you want about Supergirl, I really don't care. Not that interested in it, and it's not like this thing has a lot of energy behind it, but the fact of the matter is this does release in theaters a week after Toy Story 5 does. And even though there is somewhat, although not a huge amount of audience overlap from Toy Story to Supergirl in terms of demographic groups, it is still going to consume some of the major premium large format screens. That's going to put a dent in Toy Story's run. But the big problem is right here, coming from Universal and Illumination Studios by way of Minions and Monsters. This release is just 5 days after Supergirl, roughly 11 to 12 days after Toy Story 5. Toy Story 5 is going to have to go on a historic run for that first 11 days before this movie drops because, is there room in the box office for two big family-friendly films? Yes, absolutely. The question is which one is going to win the day. Usually it's the Johnny-come-lately one, and in the case of Minions and Monsters, I think this is going to be a bigger four-quadrant movie than Toy Story 5 could be, and here's why. There's been a lot of discussion about Toy Story 5 being a very Jessie-heavy movie, meaning that we are shifting the window from Buzz and Woody being the dominant male characters, the leads of Toy Story, to now it being Jessie. And that may be presenting a problem here for some of the quadrants of audiences and demographics that you'd otherwise want to get in. I'm not saying that the boys aren't going to want to go see this. The question is, how enamored are they going to be with this one versus some of the predecessors in Toy Story where Buzz and Woody were the quintessential heroes and the focuses of the film. However, I think Pixar did this as a deliberate calculation. And let me explain why. 2 years ago, Pixar got a smash hit, a relatively unexpected smash hit, with Inside Out 2, a movie that most of us panned as being ridiculous and terrible and awful, but then again, it wasn't made for the guys. It was made for the girls, and the audience demographic out there illustrated exactly that. I think that Pixar, probably realizing the success they had here, decided at that moment, 2 years ago almost, on June 10th when this released, that Toy Story 5 was going to be shifted over to be a Jessie-heavy movie to appeal to the girls, because they had just had a massive success with this one. Forget even the international box office on this for a moment, which was a stunning $1 billion. But the domestic box office was $650 million. Disney had not had anywhere near this success up to this point since prior to COVID, and I think Pixar really decided to drill down into the same audience with Toy Story 5. But as I mentioned before, the problems, of course, are things like Minions and Supergirl, movies that are also going to probably skew more heavily than normal, especially Supergirl for a superhero movie, to the female demographic audience than it will to the men. And let me tell you, Minions are extremely popular among the girls. I remember for the first several Despicable Me and Minions movies when my kids were much younger, and other girls that were their age, big fans of Minions. The question becomes, are they going to be more enamored with a Jessie-heavy girl power movie in Toy Story, or 11 days later is Minions going to wipe them off the chart in one way or another? Not to say that Toy Story, again, is going to be any kind of disaster, although it does have a pretty high hurdle to get over. Again, at $250 million in production costs, throw in at least another $125 million in global marketing, and you're talking about a movie with an all-in of about $375 to perhaps as high as $400 million. That means that Toy Story movie is going to have to hit between $750 and, say, maybe $800 million to really break even. This is not like Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu Electric Boogaloo that came out a couple of months ago, where it had a $165 million allegedly net budget, and then a little bit more money on top of that in terms of marketing, bringing the need for the box office to hit about $600 million, as per Disney's own admission to The Hollywood Reporter. This movie is going to have to do significantly more than that, and of course Disney is also depending on merchandise sales that come from the Toy Story brand, which I don't think have ever been in jeopardy. Either way, I think this movie is going to be a win for Disney, but I think they've obviously calculated they're going for that girls' audience again, just like with Inside Out 2, or at least drifting in that direction. Because Disney has effectively killed all of the boy brands that they spent a $10 billion to get, things like Marvel and Star Wars. They've alienated the boys. The boys are not interested in Disney, and it's been hard for Disney all these years to keep them around, even after investing so much to try to get them. I don't think that's going to change with Toy Story 5, but we'll see. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.